Introduction. Welcome to your nightmare. Hey there, brave souls of the modern world. Tonight, we're embarking on a journey that will make you want to kiss your smartphone, hug your toilet, and never take your morning coffee for granted again. We're diving headfirst into the absolute horror show that was daily life in medieval Europe. Forget everything Hollywood has ever told you about knights in shining armor, fair maidens in pristine castles, and heroic quests for glory. The truth is far more terrifying than any horror movie you've ever watched. We're talking about a time when a simple cut could kill you, when your neighbors threw human waste out their windows onto your head, and when taking a bath was considered not just unnecessary but downright dangerous to your health. This is the story of an era where the average person lived in conditions so appalling that modern prison inmates would file complaints. Before we begin this descent into medieval madness, take a moment to appreciate where you are right now. Look around at your clean walls, your electric lights, your climate-controlled environment. Feel grateful for the fact that you're not sharing your living space with livestock, that your water won't give you cholera, and that you can brush your teeth without risking your life. If you're enjoying this journey into the past, and by enjoying, I mean feeling appropriately horrified, go ahead and hit that like button. Subscribe if you want more historical reality checks that will make you never complain about modern inconveniences again. And please, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is. It's fascinating to see how people around the world are connecting with these stories of our shared human past. No matter how grim, now dim those lights. Maybe turn on a fan for some white noise, and prepare yourself for a journey that will change how you see both the past and the present. We're about to spend a full day in the year 1325, and I can guarantee you one thing. You won't make it to sunset without wanting to crawl back to the 21st century. So take a deep breath of your clean, filtered air, because in a few moments, you'll be breathing something entirely different, something that smells like death, decay, and desperation. Welcome to the Middle Ages, where survival was a daily miracle and comfort was a concept that simply didn't exist. Chapter 1. Dawn of Horror. Waking up in medieval hell. Congratulations. You've just opened your eyes in the year 1325, and you're about to experience the worst day of your life, except it's actually a pretty typical Tuesday in medieval Europe. The first thing that hits you isn't the cold, though that's coming. It's not the smell, though that's definitely coming too. It's the realization that something is crawling on you, multiple somethings. Actually, your body is a bustling metropolis of parasites, and they've been having a party while you slept. Fleas are hopping around like tiny vampires at a blood bank. Lice are setting up permanent residence in your hair, treating your scalp like prime real estate. Bedbugs are finishing their midnight feast on your flesh, leaving you with welts that will itch for days. Your bed, and I use that term extremely loosely, is a disaster that would make a homeless shelter mattress look like luxury accommodations. It's essentially a burlap sack stuffed with straw, hay, and whatever organic matter was available when it was last refreshed. That refreshing happened approximately 6 months ago, maybe longer. The straw has since decomposed into a festering mess of mold, mildew, and mystery substances that you really don't want to think about too hard. The mattress is damp. It's always damp. Sometimes from rain that leaked through your pathetic excuse for a roof. Sometimes from humidity. Sometimes from bodily fluids that we won't examine too closely. The dampness has created the perfect breeding ground for every form of bacteria, fungus, and parasite known to medieval Europe. Your bed isn't just uncomfortable, it's actively trying to kill you. Pillows, that's adorable. You think you deserve a pillow. Your head has been resting on a rolled-up piece of cloth. If you're lucky, more likely, you've been using your arm, a stone, or just the increasingly flat portion of your mattress that's been compressed by months of use. The blanket covering you weighs approximately 40 pounds, not because it's thick or warm, quite the opposite. It's heavy because it's saturated with layers upon layers of dirt, sweat, grease, and other biological deposits that have accumulated over the past year. Nobody washes blankets in medieval Europe. Water is scarce, soap doesn't exist, and besides, everyone knows that getting things wet is dangerous and unhealthy. The blanket is made of rough wool that feels like it was woven from barbed wire. It scratches your skin raw, but you cling to it anyway because the alternative is freezing to death. The wool came from sheep that were probably diseased, processed by people who were definitely diseased, and hasn't been cleaned since it left. The sheep, it's less of a blanket and more of a biological weapon that happens to provide marginal warmth. As you try to orient yourself in this nightmare, the church bell starts its morning assault on your ear. This isn't the gentle chiming you might imagine from movies. This is a massive bronze monster being beaten with a hammer by someone who clearly has anger management issues. The sound reverberates through your skull, rattling your teeth and making your already aching head feel like it's being split open with an axe. The bell serves multiple purposes in medieval society. It tells time, which is important because nobody owns a clock, a watch, or any other way of tracking the passage of hours. It calls people to prayer, which happens roughly every 3 hours because the church runs everything and wants to make sure everyone knows it. And it serves as a general warning system for everything from fires to invasions to the arrival of traveling merchants who might have bread for sale. But mostly, it's just really, really loud. And it starts ringing at dawn, which in medieval times means roughly 4:30 in the morning, depending on the season. There's no snooze button, no way to turn it off, and no escape from its relentless bronze proclamation that another day of misery has officially begun. Your home is an architectural marvel of incompetence. It's a single room that serves as bedroom, living room, dining room, kitchen, and barn all at once. The walls are made of wattle and daub, essentially sticks woven together and covered with mud, straw, and dung. Yes, dung. Animal feces is considered an excellent building material because it's waterproof, insulating, and readily available. The smell is permanent. There are no windows. Windows are for rich people. Instead, you have holes in the walls that can be covered with wooden shutters when the weather gets really bad. Most of the time, they're open, which means your home is at the mercy of whatever weather conditions exist outside. Rain comes in, snow comes in, wind comes in, and so do various forms of wildlife that consider your home their home too. The floor is dirt, not hardwood, not stone, not even rough planks, just dirt, packed earth that has been walked on, spilled on, and used as a bathroom by both humans and animals for so many years that it's achieved a consistency somewhere between concrete and mud. When it rains, your floor becomes a swamp. When it's dry, it becomes a dust storm. There's no good option. Your family is waking up around you, and by family, I mean everyone who happens to live in this one-room catastrophe. Your parents, if they're still alive, your siblings, ranging in age from infants to adults, who never moved out because there's literally nowhere else to go. Possibly your grandparents, though the odds of anyone living to old age are roughly equivalent to winning the medieval lottery. There might also be a cousin who showed up last harvest season and just never left. Maybe a neighbor whose own hovel collapsed and who's been sleeping in your corner for the past month. Possibly an apprentice who works for your father, assuming your father has some kind of trade that requires an apprentice. Privacy is not just rare in medieval Europe, it's literally inconceivable as a concept. Everyone is waking up with the same collection of aches, pains, and parasites that you have. The communal groaning and scratching that fills the air is like a morning symphony of suffering. Your little sister is crying because she's covered in flea bites. Your brother is coughing in a way that suggests his lungs are trying to escape his body. Your mother is already muttering prayers because every morning is a potential last morning in a world where death lurks around every corner. The air in your home is thick enough to chew. It's a complex bouquet of unwashed human bodies, animal waste, rotting food scraps, mildew, smoke from last night's fire, and something else that defies description but definitely suggests that something has died somewhere in your living space. Oxygen feels optional. Breathing is more of a survival challenge than an automatic biological function. Your joints ache with the intensity that would send a modern person straight to the emergency room. You're 22 years old, which in medieval terms makes you practically elderly. Your spine sounds like a percussion instrument when you try to sit up. Your knees crack and pop like bubble wrap. Your hands are already arthritic from years of manual labor that would be illegal in most modern countries. The cold is absolutely brutal. It's not just chilly, it's the kind of bone-deep, soul-crushing cold that makes you question whether you've ever actually been warm in your entire life. There's no central heating, no space heaters, no thermal underwear, no insulation in the walls. The fire in the hearth went out hours ago, and building it back up will require finding dry wood, which is a challenge when everything in your world is perpetually damp. Getting out of bed requires genuine courage. The floor is either wet from last night's rain, which leaked through approximately 17 different gaps in your roof, or it's crusty with various biological deposits that have accumulated over time. Either way, your bare feet, because shoes are a luxury most people can't afford, are about to make contact with something that will make you question every life choice that led to this moment. And this is just the beginning. This is how your day starts in medieval Europe. You haven't even attempted to go to the bathroom yet, which, as we're about to discover, is an adventure that will make waking up look like a pleasant experience by comparison. You haven't tried to eat anything, clean yourself, get dressed, or venture outside into a world that's actively trying to kill you. This is your life now. This is how millions of people lived for centuries. This is the reality that our ancestors faced every single day, with no hope of improvement, no expectation that things would get better, and no concept that life could be any different than this endless cycle of discomfort, disease, and despair. So congratulations on surviving the first 5 minutes of your medieval morning. You've managed to open your eyes, realize where you are, and not immediately die of shock. That already puts you ahead of many of your contemporaries. Now comes the hard part, trying to make it through the rest of the day. Chapter 2. The Call of Nature. Medieval bathroom Horoyov somehow managed to extract yourself from your nightmare bed. And now your body is sending you an urgent message. Nature is calling, and it's not just calling, it's screaming, demanding immediate attention with the urgency of a fire alarm. In the modern world, this would mean a quick trip to a clean private bathroom with running water, toilet paper, and reasonable expectations of hygiene. In medieval Europe, this means you're about to embark on an adventure that will haunt your dreams and challenge your will to live. Let's start with the fundamental truth about medieval sanitation. There isn't any. The concept of proper waste management hasn't been invented yet. The idea that human waste should be disposed of in a way that doesn't contaminate everything around it is still centuries away from being developed. What you are about to experience is humanity at its most primitive, dealing with bodily functions in ways that would violate every health code, safety regulation, and basic standard of human decency ever created. If you're a peasant, and statistically, you almost certainly are, your bathroom facilities consist of a wooden bucket. That's it. Just a bucket, sitting behind your house, serving the sanitation needs of your entire family and any guests who might be staying with you. This bucket has been in service for months, possibly years. It has never been properly cleaned, disinfected, or replaced. It's simply emptied when it gets too full to function, and even that doesn't happen as often as you might hope. The bucket is made of rough wood that has absorbed years' worth of liquids and odors. It's warped, cracked, and leaking in ways that have created a permanent contamination zone around your house. The wood has turned colors that don't exist in nature, developing a patina of filth that would make modern scientists weep. Sitting on this bucket is like perching on a biological weapon that happens to be shaped like furniture. But here's where it gets truly horrifying. This bucket isn't just used by your family. Uncle Wolfstan, who has the digestive system of a dying horse and the dietary habits of a garbage disposal, has been using this bucket all week after a particularly unfortunate encounter with some questionable turnips. The results of his gastrointestinal distress are still very much present, creating an olfactory experience that defies description. The smell emanating from this bucket isn't just unpleasant, it's actively hostile. It attacks your nostrils like a physical force, making your eyes water and your throat close up in self-defense. It's the kind of smell that makes you question whether humans were meant to survive as a species. The odor has achieved a complexity that includes notes of sulfur, rotting vegetables, putrid meat, and something that suggests the devil himself has been using your bathroom facilities. When the bucket inevitably fills up beyond capacity, which happens roughly once a week, someone has to empty it. That someone is usually you, because medieval life is nothing if not a constant series of unpleasant chores that somehow always become your responsibility. Emptying the bucket means carrying it carefully, because you can't afford to spill it on yourself out to the street. Yes, the street, the public thoroughfare where people walk, where children play, where merchants conduct business. Medieval waste management consists of opening your front door and dumping the contents of your toilet bucket directly onto the cobblestones outside your house. This is not only accepted practice, it's the only practice. There's literally no other option for waste disposal. The protocol for this daily horror requires you to shout a warning before dumping, In most places, you're supposed to yell "gdilu," which is a corruption of the French phrase "gare de l'eau," meaning beware of the water. Though calling it water is perhaps the most optimistic euphemism in human history, what you're actually dumping is a mixture of human waste, rotting food scraps, dead insects, and various unidentifiable substances that have been fermenting in your bucket for days. The warning shout is theoretically meant to give pedestrians a chance to move out of the way. In practice, it's more of a courtesy announcement that someone's day is about to get significantly worse. People on the street might look up, see the bucket being brandished from a second-story window, and attempt to dodge. Success rates are poor. Medieval streets are narrow, crowded, and slippery, making evasive maneuvers challenging at the best of times. The result is that medieval streets are essentially open sewers. Every morning, hundreds of households dump their waste into the same narrow passages where people must walk to get anywhere. The cobblestones, if your town is wealthy enough to have cobblestones, are permanently stained with centuries of human waste. More commonly, the streets are just dirt paths that have become contaminated rivers of filth. The smell of a medieval street defies modern comprehension. Imagine the worst public restroom you've ever encountered. Multiply that by 1000 AD, the odor of rotting food and dead animals. Then let it ferment in the sun for several centuries. The stench is so powerful it has its own ecosystem. Flies swarm in clouds so thick they block out sunlight. Rats have established permanent colonies in the waste streams. Disease breeds and spreads with the efficiency of a biological weapon. Walking down a medieval street means navigating an obstacle course of human waste while trying not to breathe too deeply. Your bare feet, remember, shoes are a luxury, are making direct contact with centuries of accumulated filth. Every step is a potential health hazard. Every puddle could contain diseases that will kill you slowly and painfully. But surely, you'd think, the wealthy must have better facilities. Surely the nobles in their castles have developed more sophisticated waste management systems. Well, yes and no. Mostly no. If you're lucky enough to live in a castle, you might have access to a garderobe. This is essentially a small chamber built into the castle wall with a hole in the floor that drops directly into the moat below. It's slightly more private than a bucket, and it does offer the convenience of not having to empty it yourself. The waste simply falls into the water surrounding the castle, where it becomes someone else's problem. The garderobe represents the pinnacle of medieval bathroom technology. It's a small, drafty room with stone walls and a wooden seat with a hole. Cut in it, there's no door, just a curtain if you're incredibly fortunate. The hole drops down through the castle wall and exits somewhere near the foundation, usually into the moat or a stream that runs past the castle. Sitting in a garderobe is an exercise in vulnerability that goes beyond simple lack of privacy. Hole in the floor is large enough for a person to fall through if they're not careful. The drop to the moat below is substantial enough to cause serious injury or death. The stone seat is cold enough to cause frostbite in winter and uncomfortable enough to make the experience thoroughly unpleasant. But here's the truly terrifying part about garderobes. They represent a major security vulnerability. Enemy forces attacking a castle know exactly where these waste chutes are located. More than one castle has fallen because attackers climbed up through the garderobe chutes, emerging inside the fortification covered in sewage, but very much alive and armed. The most famous example of this tactic occurred during the siege of Chateau Galliard in 1204, when French forces literally climbed through the castle's toilet to gain entry. Imagine being a castle defender, thinking you're safe behind your massive walls, only to have enemy soldiers emerge from your bathroom covered in centuries of accumulated waste and ready for battle. Even more horrifying, some attackers would contaminate the water supply by dumping poison, diseased animal carcasses, or other biological weapons into the streams that carried away castle waste. The same water that disposed of sewage often supplied the castle's wells and cisterns, creating a direct pathway for biological warfare. For most people, though, castles and garderobes are fantasy. The vast majority of the population deals with waste management using methods that would make modern prison systems look luxurious. Public latrines in towns are communal affairs where privacy is non-existent, and hygiene is a foreign concept. A public latrine consists of a long wooden bench with multiple holes cut in it, positioned over a pit that's supposed to be deep enough to contain the waste of hundreds of people. The bench seats anywhere from 6 to 12 people at once. meaning you'll be conducting your most private business shoulder to shoulder with strangers, neighbors, and people you'd rather not be this intimate with. That the conversations that occur in public latrines cover every aspect of medieval life. People discuss business deals, family problems, political issues, and town gossip while seated inches apart, conducting bodily functions that modern people consider intensely private. It's like a town meeting conducted under the worst possible circumstances. The pit beneath the latrine is supposed to be emptied regularly, but regularly in medieval terms means whenever someone finally volunteers for the job, or the smell becomes unbearable even by medieval standards. The people who empty these pits are called night soil men, or gong farmers, and they represent the absolute bottom of the social hierarchy. Even other peasants look down on them, which is really saying something in a society where everyone looks down on everyone else. Toilet paper hasn't been invented yet, which means you need to improvise with whatever materials are available. Wealthy people might use scraps of cloth or wool, which they'll reuse until the fabric disintegrates. Most people use whatever they can find: leaves, straw, moss, corn, cobs if they're available, or smooth stones if they're feeling particularly optimistic about their comfort levels. Many people use nothing at all, relying on their hands and whatever water might be available for cleanup. This leads to the medieval custom of eating only with the right hand, keeping the left hand reserved for sanitary functions. Hand-washing facilities are non-existent, so this arrangement represents the pinnacle of medieval hygiene management. The lack of proper sanitation creates a cascade of health problems that affect everyone in medieval society. Intestinal parasites are universal. Cholera, dysentery, and typhoid fever spread through communities like wildfire. Skin infections, eye diseases, and respiratory problems are exacerbated by constant exposure to human waste. Children growing up in this environment develop immunity to some diseases simply through constant exposure, but mortality rates are staggering. Half of all children die before reaching adulthood, and poor sanitation is a major contributing factor. Those who survive carry intestinal worms, skin conditions, and other health problems throughout their lives. The psychological impact of living in such conditions is difficult to overstate. Modern people experience stress and anxiety from far lesser hygiene challenges. Medieval people lived their entire lives in conditions that would trigger immediate intervention from modern health authorities. They normalized experiences that would traumatize contemporary individuals. Women face additional challenges in this sanitation nightmare. Menstruation must be managed without any of the products or facilities that modern women take for granted. Pregnancy and childbirth occur in environments where infection is virtually guaranteed. The maternal mortality rate reflects the impossibility of maintaining hygiene during the most vulnerable periods of women's lives. The class differences in medieval society are nowhere more apparent than in bathroom facilities. A noble might have a garderobe with a wooden seat and a curtain for privacy. A wealthy merchant might have a private bucket that gets emptied by servants. A peasant shares a community latrine with dozens of other people. The poorest simply relieve themselves wherever they can find a momentary opportunity. But even the wealthiest medieval person lives in conditions that would horrify a modern homeless individual. The best bathroom facilities of the Middle Ages wouldn't meet the standards of the worst modern public restrooms. The gap between medieval luxury and modern basic sanitation is so vast that it's difficult to comprehend. Religious attitudes toward bodily functions add another layer of complexity. Two medieval bathroom experiences. The Church teaches that the human body is inherently sinful and that bodily functions are shameful reminders of humanity's fallen state. This creates additional psychological stress around activities that are already physically and socially challenging. Some religious orders incorporate bathroom restrictions into their spiritual practices. Monks might be required to use communal facilities at specified times, regardless of biological need. Nuns might be forbidden from discussing bodily functions or expressing discomfort with unsanitary conditions. The intersection of spiritual purity and physical necessity creates contradictions that make already difficult situations even more challenging. Seasonal variations add yet another dimension to medieval bathroom horror. Winter means that your toilet bucket freezes solid, requiring you to chip away ice before it can be used. The wooden seat of a garderobe becomes cold enough to cause frostbite. Outdoor latrines become death traps, where exposure to cold weather can kill you before you finish your business. Summer brings its own challenges. The heat intensifies odors to levels that can cause nausea and fainting. Flies and other insects swarm around waste areas in numbers that make the outdoors virtually uninhabitable. Disease spreads more rapidly in warm weather, and the lack of refrigeration means that food poisoning and gastrointestinal distress are constant summer companions. The economic aspects of medieval waste management reveal yet another layer of the nightmare. Human waste has value as fertilizer, but collecting, processing, and applying it requires labor that most people can't afford. Night soil men charge fees that are beyond the reach of most families, meaning that waste accumulates until it becomes a crisis, requiring community action. Some towns attempt to regulate waste disposal through laws and fines, but enforcement is sporadic and often corrupt. Wealthy people pay fines and continue dumping waste wherever they please. Poor people can't afford fines, so they dump waste illegally and hope not to get caught. The result is a system that punishes poverty while rewarding wealth. Like most aspects of medieval society, trade and commerce are directly affected by sanitation problems. Markets and fairs become contaminated zones where food and waste mix freely. Merchants must navigate streets filled with human waste while trying to transport goods that people will eventually eat. The connection between poor sanitation and economic development becomes a vicious cycle that keeps communities trapped in poverty and disease. Travel in medieval Europe means moving from one sanitation disaster to another. Inn and tavern facilities are communal nightmares where dozens of strangers share the same bucket or latrine. Camping outdoors means creating your own waste management system with whatever materials you can find. River crossings and mountain passes become contaminated with the waste of countless travelers who had no other options. The psychological adaptation required to survive medieval bathroom conditions represents a fundamental difference between medieval and modern consciousness. Medieval people learned to normalize experiences that would cause modern people to seek therapy. They developed coping mechanisms for dealing with constant exposure to sights, smells, and situations that contemporary individuals would find traumatic. This normalization came at a cost. Medieval people accepted disease, discomfort, and death as inevitable consequences of daily life. They didn't develop expectations for improvement or demand better conditions, because they literally couldn't imagine that better conditions were possible. The acceptance of horrific bathroom conditions was part of a broader acceptance of suffering that defined medieval consciousness. And yet, somehow, life went on. People fell in love, raised families, built communities, and created art and literature, despite living in conditions that would break modern spirits. The human capacity for adaptation and survival is perhaps nowhere more evident than in medieval bathroom experiences, where people found ways to maintain dignity and community bonds while dealing with situations that challenged every aspect of human comfort and safety. So there you are, having completed your morning bathroom experience in medieval Europe. You've navigated the bucket, avoided falling through a garderobe hole, or survived a trip to the public latrine. You've managed your waste disposal responsibilities without causing too much additional contamination. You've cleaned yourself as best as possible with whatever materials were available. And now it's time for breakfast, which, as we're about to discover, presents its own unique collection of challenges that will make you long for the relative simplicity of medieval bathroom management, because in the Middle Ages, every basic human need becomes an adventure in survival. And we're just getting started with your day of medieval horror. Chapter 3, Breaking Fast, the grim reality of medieval meals. You've somehow survived your morning bathroom adventure and managed to stumble back to your family's single-room dwelling. Your stomach is now reminding you of another basic human need, food. In the modern world, this would mean access to refrigeration, clean water, a variety of fresh ingredients, and cooking facilities that don't pose an immediate threat to your life. In medieval Europe, breakfast is about to become another exercise in survival that will test your ability to consume substances that barely qualify as edible. Let's start with the fundamental truth about medieval food. Scarcity defines everything. There's never enough food, it's never fresh, and it's never safe. Famine is a constant threat that hovers over every meal like a shadow of death. People don't eat because they're hungry, they eat because they might not have another opportunity. Later, every morsel of food represents a victory against starvation that could be reversed at any moment by weather, disease, war, or simple bad luck. Your breakfast preparations begin with assessing what's available to eat, which is a depressingly short investigation. Food storage in medieval homes consists of whatever can be kept from rotting, fermenting, or being eaten by the various creatures that share your living space. There's no refrigeration, no canning, no vacuum sealing, and no preservatives beyond. Salt, which is more expensive than most people can afford. The centerpiece of your morning meal is pottage, a substance that exists somewhere between food and punishment. Pottage is essentially a thick, gloopy stew made from whatever edible materials can be found, boiled together in a pot that hasn't been properly cleaned in months. It's been simmering over your fire for days, possibly weeks, with new ingredients added. Whenever something becomes available, the pot containing your pottage is a massive iron cauldron that represents one of your family's most valuable possessions. It hangs over the fire on a chain, bubbling and steaming like a witch's brew. The contents have achieved a consistency somewhere between pudding and cement, with a color that suggests it might glow in the dark under the right conditions. Today's pottage contains barley that's been boiling so long it's lost all resemblance to its original form. There are some root vegetables that might have been turnips or parsnips before they dissolved into unrecognizable chunks. A few beans float in the mixture, though whether they're edible beans or something else entirely is open to interpretation. The liquid binding everything together is water from the local well, which may or may not be contaminated with the runoff from your neighbors. Waste disposal activities. The seasoning situation is grim beyond description. Salt costs more per pound than most people earn in a month, so it's used sparingly if at all. Pepper is literally worth more than gold and is completely beyond the reach of anyone below the noble class. Other spices exist in theory, but not in practice for people of your social standing. Instead of proper seasonings, your pottage might contain whatever herbs can be foraged from the surrounding countryside. Wild garlic, if you're lucky, though it might actually be a toxic plant that looks similar. Some bitter greens that may or may not be edible. Perhaps a few berries that haven't yet fermented into something alcoholic. The line between seasoning and poisoning is frustratingly thin in medieval cuisine. Sitting around the pot with your family, you're served your portion in a wooden bowl that's been carved from local timber and has never been properly cleaned. The bowl has absorbed years of food residue, creating a permanent layer of grease and bacteria that adds its own distinctive flavor to every meal. The wood has cracked and warped, creating crevices where food particles and microorganisms can establish permanent colonies. Your eating utensil is a wooden spoon, assuming your family owns spoons. More likely, you're eating with your hands, which haven't been washed since yesterday and have been in contact with every contaminated surface in your environment. The medieval custom of eating with your hands isn't a charming cultural tradition, it's economic necessity. Utensils are expensive, metal is scarce, and manufacturing anything more sophisticated than a wooden spoon requires resources that most families simply don't have. The bread accompanying your pottage represents another adventure in medieval survival. This isn't the soft, white, fluffy bread you might imagine. Medieval bread for common people is made from whatever grains are available, often bulked out with sawdust, ground acorns, or other creative ingredients that help stretch limited supplies. The grain used in your bread is primarily rye or barley, coarsely ground with stones that add their own gritty texture to the final product. The flour contains fragments of stone, pieces of wood, insect parts, mouse droppings, and other materials that got mixed in during the grinding process. Quality control doesn't exist, and the concept of food safety won't be invented for several centuries. The bread is baked in communal ovens that serve entire neighborhoods, assuming your community has managed to build and maintain an oven. More commonly, bread is cooked on hot stones or in primitive clay ovens that produce results ranging from burnt on the outside and raw on the inside to merely inedible rather than actually dangerous. Your daily bread ration is a chunk roughly the size of your fist, dense enough to be used as a weapon and hard enough to survive being thrown at an enemy. Breaking this bread requires genuine effort. You don't slice it, you attack it with whatever sharp implement you can find, trying to chip off pieces small enough to fit in your mouth without breaking your teeth. The bread tastes like cardboard, mixed with sawdust and seasoned with despair. It's sour from fermentation that wasn't properly controlled, bitter from the various non-grain ingredients and gritty from the stone fragments. Eating it is like chewing on flavored gravel, and it sits in your stomach like a stone that may never digest properly, but you eat it anyway, because not eating it means starvation, and starvation means death. Medieval people developed powerful jaw muscles from years of chewing bread that could double as building materials. They lose teeth regularly from the constant wear and tear of processing food that fights back. Your beverage options for breakfast are limited and universally alcoholic. Water, as we've established, is contaminated with human waste and various diseases that will kill you, slowly and painfully. Tea and coffee haven't been discovered yet. Milk is available only if your family owns a cow, which is about as likely as owning a private jet in the modern world. So you start your day with ale, weak beer that contains just enough alcohol to kill some of the bacteria that would otherwise kill you. This isn't recreational drinking, it's survival medicine disguised as breakfast beverage. Children drink it too, because the alternative is cholera, typhoid, or dysentery. The ale is brewed by your mother or wife in the same pot that's used for cooking, using water from the same contaminated sources that supply everything else in your life. The brewing process involves fermentation that may or may not be proceeding properly, depending on temperature, timing, and whether the resident bacteria are cooperating or rebelling. The taste of medieval breakfast ale defies modern description. It's flat, warm, sour, and slightly fizzy from fermentation that's still happening in your cup. It has a tang that suggests it's well on its way to becoming vinegar, with undertones that remind you why people consider alcohol a form of medicine. You drink it because you need the calories, the liquid, and the mild antiseptic properties, not because it provides any kind of enjoyment. Protein is virtually non-existent in your breakfast, unless you're incredibly wealthy or it's a major religious holiday. Meat is reserved for special occasions that occur maybe 3 or 4 times per year. Eggs are available only if your family owns chickens, which requires resources for feeding and housing them that most people can't afford. Fish might be available if you live near water and have the time and equipment for fishing, but fishing requires nets, hooks, and boats that represent major investments. Rivers and streams are often contaminated with the same waste that pollutes everything else, making fish consumption a gamble with potentially fatal consequences. Cheese is theoretically possible if you have access to milk and the knowledge for cheesemaking, but preservation without refrigeration is nearly impossible. Most dairy products spoil within hours of being produced, creating a narrow window for consumption before they become dangerous. The absence of protein in your breakfast means you're starting your day in a state of malnutrition that will affect your energy levels, cognitive function, and ability to perform the back-breaking labor that awaits you. Your body is already running on empty, and the day hasn't even begun in earnest. Fresh fruits and vegetables are seasonal luxuries that appear briefly and disappear quickly. Apples might be available for a few weeks in autumn before they rot or get eaten by worms. Wild berries can be foraged if you know which ones won't poison you, and if you can gather them before they ferment naturally into alcoholic mush. Most fresh produce is actually past its prime by modern standards. Vegetables are wilted, fruit is bruised and partially rotted, and everything has been exposed to the same unsanitary conditions that contaminate every other aspect of medieval life. The concept of washing produce doesn't exist, so you're eating fruits and vegetables that have been fertilized with human waste, handled by unwashed hands, and stored in conditions that would horrify modern health inspectors. Preservation techniques are primitive and unreliable. Salting works if you can afford salt, but most people can't. Smoking requires facilities and fuel that are beyond most families' resources. Drying depends on weather conditions that are often uncooperative. Fermentation happens whether you want it to or not, turning food into alcoholic versions of itself that may or may not be edible. The seasonality of food means that your breakfast in winter is dramatically different from your breakfast in summer, and neither is particularly appealing. Summer breakfast might include some fresh vegetables and fruits, but they're competing with flies, wasps, and various forms of rot and decay. Winter breakfast consists entirely of preserved foods that have been slowly decomposing in storage for months. Spring is the cruelest season for medieval food, because it's when preserved foods from the previous harvest are running out, but new crops haven't grown yet. This period, known as the hunger gap, is when families face starvation, despite having survived the winter. People die not from cold, but from malnutrition. Just as the weather is finally becoming survivable, your family's food situation is complicated by the fact that you don't own the land you work or the crops you grow. Medieval society is based on feudalism, which means that most of the food you produce belongs to your lord, who allows you to keep just enough to barely survive in exchange for your labor and loyalty. The best portions of every harvest go to the nobility. The next best portions go to the church as tithes. What remains is divided among the peasant families who did the actual work of growing the food. Your breakfast consists of the scraps and leftovers that nobody else wanted, prepared with whatever cooking skills your family has managed to develop. Cooking techniques are limited by the technology available, which is essentially fire and whatever pots you can afford. There's no temperature control, no timing mechanisms, and no way to ensure that food is cooked safely. Everything is either burnt, raw, or somewhere in between, depending on your luck with fire management. The fire itself is another major challenge. Keeping a fire burning requires a constant supply of dry fuel, which is difficult to find and expensive to buy. Wood must be gathered from forests that may be owned by nobles who don't allow peasants to collect fuel. Coal is available in some areas but costs money that most families don't have. Starting a fire requires flint and steel, assuming your family owns these tools. More commonly, fires are started by borrowing embers from neighbors who have managed to keep their fires burning. Once your fire goes out, getting it restarted may require walking to another village to find someone willing to share their flames. Fire management is a full-time job that falls primarily to women and children. Someone must constantly feed the fire, adjust the cooking pot, and monitor the food to prevent it from burning or boiling over. This means that family members take turns sitting by the fire instead of doing other necessary work, creating a constant tension between cooking and productivity. The smoke from your cooking fire has no proper ventilation system, so it fills your single-room home with thick, choking clouds that make breathing difficult and vision nearly impossible. Your eyes water constantly, your throat burns, and your lungs collect soot that will contribute to respiratory problems throughout your life. Everyone in your family bears the permanent marks of living with fire. Your clothes are singed and stained with soot. Your hair smells perpetually of smoke. Your skin is darkened and roughened by constant exposure to heat and flames. Fire-related injuries are common and often fatal, as burns become infected in environments where proper medical care doesn't exist. The cooking pot itself represents a major investment for your family. Iron cookware is expensive and difficult to maintain. The pot must be cleaned without soap, using sand, ashes, or other abrasive materials that gradually wear away the metal. Eventually, every pot develops holes that make it useless for cooking liquids. Repairing or replacing cookware requires resources that most families can't afford. A new pot might cost several months' wages, if wages exist at all in your agricultural economy. Most families use the same pot for years or decades, watching it gradually deteriorate until it becomes more of a strainer than a container. The food storage situation in your home is a constant battle against decay, vermin, and theft. Grain must be kept dry, which is nearly impossible in a house that leaks. Vegetables must be protected from rotting, which requires conditions that don't exist in medieval homes. Everything edible attracts mice, rats, insects, and other creatures that consider your food supplies their personal buffet. Rats are particularly problematic because they not only eat your food, but contaminate everything they touch with their droppings and urine. Rat droppings in food supplies are inevitable, and most families simply accept them as an unavoidable part of their diet. The diseases carried by rats add another layer of danger to an already hazardous food system. Mice nest in grain supplies, turning your breakfast ingredients into rodent nurseries. Insects lay eggs in stored food, creating protein supplements that you didn't request but will consume anyway. Larger animals occasionally break into homes and consume entire food supplies, leaving families facing immediate starvation. The economic aspects of food in medieval society create additional pressures that affect every meal. Food prices fluctuate wildly based on weather, political conditions, and various disasters that can destroy crops or disrupt transportation. A bad harvest can make food prices increase by 10 or 20 times normal levels, putting basic nutrition beyond the reach of most families. Markets and fairs provide access to foods that aren't locally available, but they're also expensive and often unreliable. Traveling merchants may offer exotic items like spices or imported grains, but they charge prices that only the wealthy can afford. For most people, markets are places to look at food they can't buy rather than sources of actual nutrition. Church's influence on food adds another complex layer to medieval dining. Religious fasting requirements mean that certain foods are forbidden on specific days, regardless of whether you can afford other options. Fish days require eating fish, even if fish isn't available or affordable. Fast days require avoiding meat, even if meat is the only food you have access to. Religious authorities monitor food consumption and can impose penalties for violating dietary restrictions. These penalties often involve fines that poor families can't afford, creating situations where people are punished for trying to survive. The intersection of religious law and economic necessity creates moral dilemmas that have no good solutions. Seasonal religious observances affect food availability and preparation. Lent requires avoiding meat and dairy for 40 days, just as winter food supplies are running low and spring crops haven't yet grown. Christmas and Easter feasts require special foods that most families can't afford, creating social pressure to spend money on celebration while facing starvation. The social aspects of food consumption revealed the harsh realities of medieval class structure. What you eat, when you eat it, and how you eat it, all depend on your position in the social hierarchy. Peasants eat standing up, using their hands, consuming whatever scraps are available. Nobles eat seated, using utensils, enjoying multiple courses of specially prepared foods. Food quality varies dramatically by social class. Peasant bread is coarse, dark, and filled with additives to bulk it out. Noble bread is white, soft, and made from the finest wheat flour. Peasant ale is weak and sour. Noble wine is imported and carefully aged. The gap between peasant and noble nutrition is so vast that they're essentially eating different types of substances entirely. Even within peasant families, food distribution reflects social hierarchies. The father, as head of household, gets the largest and best portions. Sons receive more food than daughters. Elderly family members may receive smaller portions to ensure that working-age adults get adequate nutrition. Children often go hungry, so that adults can maintain enough strength for labor. Pregnancy and childbirth create additional nutritional challenges for women, who need extra calories and nutrients at precisely the times when they're least able to compete for food resources. Pregnant women often suffer from malnutrition that affects both their health and their children's development. Nursing mothers require additional food that most families can't provide. The psychological effects of chronic malnutrition affect every aspect of medieval life. Hunger is a constant companion that influences decision-making, social relationships, and long-term planning. People living in conditions of food scarcity develop different attitudes toward sharing, saving, and risk-taking than people who have reliable access to nutrition. Children growing up with inadequate nutrition develop differently than well-fed children. Their physical growth is stunted, their cognitive development is impaired, and their immune systems are weakened by constant undernourishment. The effects of childhood malnutrition persist throughout their lives, creating cycles of poverty and poor health that affects entire communities. The agricultural calendar dominates every aspect of food planning and consumption. Spring means preparing fields and planting crops while surviving on dwindling winter supplies. Summer means working constantly to maintain growing crops while hoping that weather conditions remain favorable. Autumn means harvesting frantically while preparing for another winter of scarcity. Weather disasters can destroy entire food systems with devastating speed. A late frost can kill fruit trees, eliminating that food source for years. Too much rain can rot crops in the fields, leaving nothing to harvest. Too little rain can create drought conditions that make agriculture impossible. Hail, wind, or early snow can destroy months of agricultural work in a single afternoon. Political conflicts add another layer of uncertainty to food supplies. Armies passing through agricultural areas often steal crops, livestock, and stored food, leaving local populations facing starvation. Wars can disrupt planting and harvesting schedules, creating food shortages that persist for years after conflicts end. Bandits and criminals target food supplies because they know that starving people will pay almost anything for nutrition. Food caravans require armed guards to protect them from robbery. Individual families must hide their food supplies to prevent theft by desperate neighbors. The scarcity of food creates criminal incentives that make communities less safe and less cooperative. The technological limitations of medieval agriculture mean that crop yields are low and unreliable. Farming techniques are primitive, fertilization methods are ineffective, and pest control is virtually non-existent. A single plague of locusts can destroy regional food supplies, creating famines that kill thousands of people. Seeds for planting are often of poor quality, producing crops that are vulnerable to disease and pests. Crop rotation isn't well understood, leading to soil exhaustion that reduces yields over time. Irrigation systems are primitive or non-existent, making agriculture entirely dependent on natural rainfall patterns. Livestock management is equally challenging. Animals require feed that competes with human food needs. Diseases can kill entire herds, eliminating both current food sources and future breeding stock. Predators can destroy livestock that represent years of investment and care. The decision to slaughter animals for immediate food versus keeping them for future reproduction creates difficult choices with no clear answers. The preservation and storage of animal products presents additional challenges. Meat spoils rapidly without refrigeration, requiring immediate consumption or preservation techniques that alter its taste and nutritional value. Dairy products have extremely short shelf lives, making them unreliable food sources, except during brief periods of abundance. Trade and commerce in food products are complicated by transportation difficulties and preservation challenges. Moving food from areas of surplus to areas of scarcity requires time and resources that often make such trade economically unfeasible. By the time food reaches distant markets, it may be spoiled, contaminated, or prohibitively expensive. International trade in food is limited to non-perishable items like grains, salt, and preserved meats that can survive long-distance transportation. Exotic foods like spices are luxury items that have no impact on basic nutrition for most people. The global food system that modern people take for granted simply doesn't exist in medieval Europe. Urban food supplies are particularly vulnerable because cities depend entirely on rural areas for nutrition. When agricultural production fails, urban populations face immediate starvation with no alternatives. Cities can't produce their own food, and their dense populations quickly exhaust available supplies during emergencies. Rural populations have slightly more options during food crises because they can forage for wild plants, hunt small animals, and consume parts of crops that would normally be reserved for livestock. But these survival strategies provide minimal nutrition and often involve consuming foods that are dangerous or barely edible. The medical understanding of nutrition is virtually non-existent in medieval Europe. People don't understand the relationship between diet and health, the importance of vitamins and minerals, or the long-term effects of malnutrition. Dietary choices are based on availability and tradition, rather than nutritional science. Food illnesses are common but poorly understood. Food poisoning is attributed to evil spirits or moral failings rather than bacterial contamination. Nutritional deficiencies create diseases that medieval medicine can't diagnose or treat effectively. The lack of understanding about food safety means that people regularly consume contaminated foods without realizing the risks. The preparation and consumption of your medieval breakfast takes place against this backdrop of scarcity, danger, and uncertainty. Every bite represents a victory against starvation, but also a risk of illness or poisoning. The pottage you're eating may contain nutrients that will keep you alive another day, or it may contain bacteria that will kill you slowly and painfully. The bread you're chewing may provide the carbohydrates you need for energy, or it may be contaminated with ergot fungus that will cause hallucinations and convulsions. The ale you're drinking may protect you from waterborne diseases, or it may be poorly fermented and contribute to digestive problems that will plague you for weeks. And yet, somehow, you finish your breakfast. You consume your portion of pottage, gnaw through your chunk of bread, and drain your cup of sour ale. You've successfully completed another meal in medieval Europe, which means you've survived another potential encounter with starvation, poisoning, or disease. Your stomach is partially full, though far from satisfied. You have enough nutrition to begin your day's labor, though not enough to perform it well or maintain your health long term. You've consumed calories that will keep you alive for another few hours, buying you time to worry about where your next meal will come from. Breakfast experience has reminded you of your position in medieval society's hierarchy. You've eaten peasant food, prepared in peasant conditions, by peasant methods. The contrast with how nobles eat their morning meals is so stark that you might as well be different species entirely, and now it's time to get dressed for the day ahead, which, as we're about to discover, involves putting on clothes that will make you long for the relative comfort of your breakfast experience. Because in medieval Europe, every aspect of daily life is designed to test your will to survive, and we're still in the early morning hours of what promises to be a very long day. Chapter 4. Dressed for Disaster, the nightmare of medieval clothing. You've survived breakfast, which is already more than many people accomplish on any given day in medieval Europe. Now comes another daily trial that will test your tolerance for discomfort, getting dressed. In the modern world, this means selecting clean clothes from a variety of options, putting on undergarments designed for comfort and hygiene, and choosing footwear appropriate for the day's activities. In medieval Europe, getting dressed means wrapping yourself in the same filthy, uncomfortable, pest-infested garments you've worn every day for months, while trying not to think about what's living in the fabric. Let's start with your wardrobe, which is a generous term for the single outfit that constitutes your entire clothing collection. You own exactly one set of clothes, not one nice outfit and one for work, not one for winter and one for summer, not one for special occasions and one for everyday wear. Just one complete set of garments that serves every function, meets every need, and handles every situation you'll encounter for the next several years. This outfit consists of a tunic or shift that reaches roughly to your knees, made from rough wool or coarse linen, depending on what your family could afford when it was purchased or inherited years ago. The fabric is so rough that it feels like it was woven from thorns and disappointment. Every thread seems specifically designed to irritate your skin, creating a constant state of discomfort that you've learned to accept as normal. The tunic has been worn every single day for months, possibly years, without being properly cleaned. Medieval people don't understand the connection between dirty clothes and disease, and even if they did, washing clothes is so difficult and time-consuming that it happens rarely, if at all. Your tunic is saturated with layers of sweat, dirt, food stains, and bodily fluids that have accumulated over time, creating a garment that's more biological specimen than clothing. The color of your tunic is impossible to determine because it's been stained beyond recognition. What might have originally been brown or gray or natural linen color has become a complex palette of mud, blood, grease, and substances you'd rather not identify. The stains tell the story of your life: dark patches from agricultural work, lighter spots from spilled food, mysterious discolorations that might be wine, or might be something far worse. Putting on this tunic is like wrapping yourself in a bacterial culture that's been growing for months. The fabric is stiff with accumulated grime, crackling as you move it around your body. It smells like a combination of barn animals, rotting vegetables, and human despair. The odor is so integrated into the fabric that it's become part of the garment's essential character. Under your tunic, if you're fortunate enough to have undergarments at all, you wear a linen shift that was once white but is now a color that doesn't exist in nature. This undergarment was supposed to protect your skin from the rough outer fabric and provide an additional layer of warmth, but it's been worn so long without washing that it's become another source of irritation rather than comfort. The linen shift is full of holes that started small and have gradually expanded through wear and tear. What began as tiny tears from catching on things had become gaping wounds in the fabric that defeat the garment's purpose entirely. These holes provide convenient entry points for insects and parasites while allowing the rough outer tunic to rub directly against your skin. The shirt is held together by stitching that was done by hand, using thread that wasn't designed for long-term durability. Medieval sewing techniques are functional rather than refined, creating seams that pull apart under stress and leave loose ends that catch on everything. Your undergarment is constantly coming apart, requiring ongoing repairs that you don't have time to perform properly. If you're male, your leg coverings consist of woolen hose that are more whole than fabric, held up by leather straps or rope tied around your waist. These hose were originally designed to cover your legs from ankle to thigh, but they've shrunk, stretched, and deteriorated to the point where they provide only partial coverage and questionable protection. The hose are riddled with runs and tears that have been patched so many times that the patches have patches. Each repair job uses whatever fabric scraps are available, creating a patchwork effect that makes your legs look like a textile disaster area. The different fabrics and colors create a visual chaos that announces your poverty to everyone who sees you. The fit of medieval hose is universally terrible because they're not sized for individual bodies. They're made in rough approximations of human leg shapes and then adjusted through creative tying, pinning, and hoping for the best. They're either too loose, causing them to sag and bunch uncomfortably, or too tight, cutting off circulation and creating permanent marks on your skin. The wool used in hose is the roughest, scratchiest material available, because that's what poor people can afford. It's like wearing steel wool against your skin, creating constant friction that keeps your legs in a perpetual state of irritation. The fabric pills and sheds, leaving your skin covered with wool fibers that work their way into your pores. If you're female, your clothing situation is even more complex and uncomfortable. Women wear multiple layers of garments that combine to create a system of clothing that's hot in summer, cold in winter, and uncomfortable year-round. The base layer is a linen chemise that suffers from all the same problems as men's undershirts, but with additional complications. Over the chemise goes a woolen kirtle, or gown that reaches to your ankles and is designed to cover your entire body, except for your hands and face. This garment is hot, heavy, and restrictive, limiting your movement and making physical labor even more difficult than it already is. The long skirts drag on the ground, collecting dirt, mud, and waste from the streets and floors you walk on. The kirtle is held in place by a belt or rope tied around your waist, but medieval understanding of proper fit is rudimentary at best. The garment either hangs loose like a tent, making you look shapeless and allowing cold air to circulate inside, or it's tied tight enough to restrict breathing and movement. There's no middle ground between too loose and too tight. Women's sleeves are particularly problematic because they're often detachable, held on by ties or pins that regularly come loose. Losing a sleeve during the day means working with one bare arm while trying to keep track of the missing piece of clothing. The attachment points wear out quickly, requiring constant repairs that take time away from other necessary tasks. The fabrics available for medieval clothing are limited to wool, linen, and occasionally leather for those who can afford it. Cotton hasn't been introduced to Europe yet, and silk is so expensive that it's reserved for the highest nobility. The wool is rough and scratchy, the linen is coarse and stiff, and both materials are difficult to work with using medieval tools and techniques. Dyeing fabrics is an expensive process that requires materials and skills that most people don't have access to. Natural dyes are expensive, often toxic, and produce colors that fade quickly. Most peasant clothing is left in its natural color, which ranges from dingy white linen to various shades of brown and gray wool. The lack of color in medieval clothing contributes to the general atmosphere of dreariness that characterizes peasant life. The construction techniques used in medieval clothing are functional but not comfortable. Seams are sewn by hand using thick thread that creates ridges and bumps that rub against your skin. Buttons haven't been invented yet, so garments are held closed by ties, pins, or clasps that regularly come undone. Getting dressed requires tying numerous knots and adjusting multiple pieces of fabric that never quite fit properly. The lack of elastic means that medieval clothes can't stretch to accommodate movement or changes in body size. Everything is either too loose or too tight, with no possibility of adjustment for comfort. Garments that fit properly when you're standing become uncomfortable when you sit, bend, or reach. Every movement requires fighting against clothing that restricts rather than facilitates motion. Medieval people don't change clothes based on weather, season, or activity. You wear the same outfit whether you're working in the fields, attending church, sleeping, or participating in community events. The clothing isn't designed for any specific activity because it has to serve all functions simultaneously. This means it's never quite right for whatever you're doing. Washing clothes is such a difficult and time-consuming process that most people simply don't do it. Proper washing requires hauling water from a well or stream, heating it over a fire, finding soap or other cleaning agents, scrubbing the garments by hand, and then drying them outdoors. The entire process takes most of a day and uses resources that most families can't spare. Even when clothes are washed, the cleaning process is harsh and destructive. Medieval soap is made from lye and animal fat, creating a caustic mixture that's as likely to damage fabric as clean it. Scrubbing clothes on rocks or washboards wears out the fabric quickly, shortening the already brief lifespan of garments that need to last for years. Drying clothes presents additional challenges because medieval homes don't have adequate indoor space or heating to dry garments quickly. Clothes hung outdoors may be stolen, blown away by wind, or damaged by rain before they dry completely. In winter, wet clothes can freeze solid, making them impossible to wear until they thaw. The infrequent washing schedule means that your clothes are always dirty. They're stained with food, mud, sweat, and various substances that you've encountered during work and daily activities. The stains set into the fabric over time, becoming permanent decorations that advertise your activities and social status. To everyone who sees you, parasites consider your clothes their natural habitat. Lice live in the seams and folds of your garments, feeding on your blood and reproducing constantly. Fleas hop from your clothes to your skin and back again, treating your outfit like a mobile ecosystem. Bedbugs hide in your clothing during the day and emerge at night to feed on your blood while you sleep. The constant presence of insects in your clothes means that getting dressed involves putting on garments that are actively infested with creatures that bite, sting, and irritate your skin. You can feel them moving around as you put on your clothes, but there's nothing you can do about it, because every piece of clothing in your world is equally contaminated. Scratching becomes a constant activity as you try to relieve the itching caused by insect bites on rough fabric. Your skin is permanently irritated from the combination of parasites and coarse materials, creating a cycle of scratching that only makes the irritation worse. Your fingernails are worn down from constant scratching, and your skin is marked with scratches and scabs that never heal completely. The smell of medieval clothes is indescribable by modern standards. Imagine the worst thrift store odor, multiply it by 100, and add notes of barnyard, compost heap, and biological decay. Your clothes smell like every activity you've performed, every environment you've been in, and every substance you've encountered for months. The smell is so integrated into the fabric that it's become part of your personal aura. Other people's clothes smell just as bad as yours, so nobody notices or comments on the odor. Medieval people developed nose blindness to their own smells and those of their community. What would be considered unbearably offensive by modern standards is simply normal background odor. In medieval society, the economic aspects of clothing in medieval society mean that garments are incredibly valuable despite their poor condition. A single outfit represents a major investment that might cost several months' wages for a peasant family. Clothes are often inherited, passed down through generations, until they literally fall apart and can't be repaired anymore. Repairing clothes is a constant necessity that takes up significant time and resources. Every tear must be patched, every loose seam must be resewn, and every worn spot must be reinforced before it becomes a whole. Medieval sewing is done by hand using expensive thread and needles that are precious commodities. Most repairs are functional rather than attractive, creating patchwork effects that make clothes look like textile disasters. Replacing clothes is often impossible for poor families. When garments finally wear out completely, people may go without, rather than spend money they don't have on new clothing. Children often wear clothes that are too big or too small because their families can't afford proper fitting. Adults may wear garments that are inappropriate for their age or gender, simply because that's what's available. The seasonal aspects of medieval clothing create additional challenges because most people don't have different outfits for different weather conditions. Your single set of clothes must serve in summer heat and winter cold, during rainy seasons and dry periods, while working outdoors and sleeping indoors. This means your clothes are never quite right for the current conditions. In winter, your wool garments provide some insulation, but they're not designed for serious cold weather protection. There's no concept of layering for warmth, no understanding of how to trap body heat effectively, and no materials available that provide good insulation without being prohibitively expensive. People simply endure cold weather while wearing inadequate clothing. Summer brings its own clothing challenges as heavy wool garments become unbearably hot and humid. There's no concept of lightweight summer clothing for poor people, so you wear the same heavy fabrics year-round. The lack of ventilation in medieval clothing means that sweat has nowhere to go, creating a constantly damp environment that promotes bacterial growth and skin problems. Footwear deserves special mention as perhaps the most inadequate aspect of medieval clothing. Shoes are luxury items that most peasants can't afford. When shoes are available, They're made from untreated leather that provides minimal protection and no support for your feet. The leather is often poorly tanned, creating shoes that are stiff, uncomfortable, and prone to cracking. Medieval shoes have no left and right differentiation. They're made in identical shapes that gradually conform to your feet through wear. This means new shoes are equally uncomfortable on both feet until they break in, which can take months of painful wear. The soles are thin and provide no cushioning against rocks, rough ground, or sharp objects. Most people go barefoot most of the time because shoes are too valuable to wear for everyday activities. Bare feet must handle all terrain, all weather, and all hazards, including broken pottery, animal waste, sharp stones, and thorns. The soles of medieval feet developed thick calluses that provide some protection, but cuts, infections, and injuries are common and often serious. Going barefoot in medieval streets means walking through the accumulated waste and filth that we discussed in the bathroom chapter. Your feet are in constant contact with human waste, animal droppings, rotting food, and other contaminated materials. Foot infections and diseases spread rapidly through communities where people walk barefoot. Through contaminated environments, the social aspects of clothing in medieval society clearly indicate class and status. Peasant clothes are rough, patched, and dirty. Merchant clothes are better quality, but still practical. Noble clothes are made from fine materials, dyed in expensive colors, and decorated with embroidery or other ornamentations. The quality and appearance of your clothes immediately announce your social position to everyone who sees you. Sumptuary laws in many areas legally restrict what kinds of clothes different classes can wear. Peasants are forbidden from wearing certain colors, fabrics, or decorations that are reserved for higher social classes. Violating these laws can result in fines, imprisonment, or other punishments that reinforce social hierarchies through clothing regulations. The psychological effects of wearing uncomfortable, dirty, inadequate clothing affect self-esteem, social interactions, and mental health. When you're constantly uncomfortable, itchy, cold, or hot, it's difficult to focus on other aspects of life. The knowledge that your appearance announces your low social status affects how you interact with others and how they interact with you. Children grow up wearing adult clothes that are too large, creating safety hazards and movement restrictions that affect their development. There's no concept of child-specific clothing design, so children wear miniature versions of adult garments or hand-me-downs that don't fit properly. This affects their ability to play, learn, and develop normally. Pregnancy creates additional clothing challenges for women who need to accommodate changing body sizes using garments that can't be adjusted. Medieval maternity wear consists of the same clothes worn looser or tied differently, providing no support or comfort during pregnancy. This contributes to the physical difficulties and health problems that pregnant women face. Occupational clothing doesn't exist in medieval society, so people perform dangerous or dirty work while wearing their only set of clothes. Blacksmiths work with hot metal while wearing wool that can catch fire. Farmers work in fields while wearing long skirts that catch on tools and plants. The lack of appropriate work clothing makes already dangerous jobs even more hazardous. The textile industry in medieval Europe is primitive and inefficient, producing fabrics that are expensive, poor quality, and limited in variety. Spinning and weaving are done by hand using simple tools that produce uneven, weak threads and fabrics. The time and labor required to produce cloth makes it incredibly valuable despite its poor quality. Sheep raising for wool production competes with food production for land use, creating economic pressures that affect both clothing and nutrition. Flax growing for linen production requires good agricultural land that could be used for food crops. The competition between clothing and food needs affects family resource allocation and community planning. Trade in textiles is limited by transportation difficulties and the perishable nature of some materials. Long-distance trade in cloth is expensive and risky, making imported fabrics, luxury items available only to the wealthy. Most people wear clothes made from locally produced materials that may not be well suited to local climate conditions. Clothing production is primarily done by women, in addition to their other household responsibilities. Spinning thread, weaving, cloth, and sewing garments are time-consuming tasks that must be fit around cooking, cleaning, childcare, and agricultural work. The burden of clothing production falls disproportionately on women who are already overworked and understaffed. The tools used for clothing production are primitive and inefficient. Spinning wheels are expensive and not widely available, so most thread is spun by hand using drop spindles. Looms are large, expensive, and require significant skill to operate effectively. Needles are precious commodities that are carefully maintained and often inherited as valuable possessions. Clothing repairs require skills that must be learned through experience and practice. Sewing, patching, and mending are essential survival skills that everyone must develop regardless of their natural aptitude or interest. Poor repair work can ruin valuable garments, creating additional economic pressures on families that can't afford mistakes. The storage and care of clothing in medieval homes presents ongoing challenges. There are no closets, wardrobes, or proper storage furniture for most families. Clothes are hung on pegs, folded in chests if they're available, or simply piled in corners where they collect dust, moisture, and insects. Proper storage to prevent damage is impossible in most medieval homes. Clothing theft is a serious problem in medieval communities because garments are valuable and portable. Clothes hung out to dry may be stolen by desperate people who need clothing more than you do. Valuable items like shoes or better quality garments must be carefully guarded to prevent theft. The legal aspects of clothing in medieval society include complex inheritance laws that govern who receives clothing when family members die. Clothes are often specifically mentioned in wills because they represent significant value. Disputes over clothing inheritance can create family conflicts and legal problems that persist for generations. And so, after this lengthy and uncomfortable process, you're finally dressed for the day in medieval Europe. You've put on clothes that smell terrible, itch constantly, fit poorly, chat controls, sonnet for